So, Mr. Hali, did India invade Pakistan across international borders in 1971 in a one sided imposed war?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. This is a very important question because one of the pleas that India has been taking and one of the myths that it has created, that the Pakistan Air Force carried out a preemptive strike on the 3rd of December, and thus Pakistan was the aggressor and India retaliated in response to the airstrike by Pakistan. But the fact is that on the 16th of November, Indian forces had blatantly crossed the international boundaries into East Pakistan and had launched a full-fledged war. In fact, I would say that it was perhaps a failure on our part, that we should have taken action and we should have opened the front in West Pakistan. But we dilly-dallied and somehow the initiative was taken by the air chief on the 3rd December. But India definitely did. And of course, there are many other reasons why it did it on 16th of November. If you want, I'll share it with you because it goes to say that the Indians were actually very keen to launch an operation right in April after the 25th March action of the Pakistan Army to wrest back the control of East Pakistan, which had actually broken away. But the fact is that Sam Manekshaw, who was the commander-in-chief of the Indian forces, informed Indira Gandhi. In fact, he was called into the parliament and he said it very clearly that the forces are not ready. They need another 6 months to prepare. And also he gave the plea that onwards the monsoon season will come in and the Indian tanks will bog down, so the best time to attack would be November. And that is exactly what they did, which was a blatant aggression against the sovereignty of Pakistan.
Can we and should we use the term and the word invasion to describe the events of 1971? Can we categorically say that India invaded Pakistan in 1971?
In fact, there is no other term which can be used for India's aggression. It was an invasion. It was pre-planned and it was planned for more than at least a decade, according to my research. And India actually used a textbook fashion, steps to invade East Pakistan. West Pakistan, of course, was secondary. It was expecting that we will retaliate. It had kept its forces ready, but it invaded East Pakistan, and there is no other way to describe it.
Did India expand conflict with Pakistan, which was limited to Kashmir and was fought both occasionally on the ground inside Kashmir and mostly at the diplomatic level at the United Nations? Did India, by invading Pakistan in 1971, did India actually expand the conflict between two peoples, two nations, Pakistan and India, by taking an action that is beyond the actual conflict in Kashmir?
Indeed, you see, hindsight is 2020 and 50 years have passed. And now if you study exactly what happened, of course there's been a lot of propaganda and there has been a one-sided narrative from the Indians who have been painting us as aggressors, as marauders, as looters, as people who carried out a genocide and raped the Indian women. But all that is a bunch of lies. And in my book, Tormented Truth, 1971 and beyond, I have come across solid arguments, solid evidence which belies and bursts these myths. Now, you see, the fact is that India, of course, it may have been wanting to restrict the action only in East Pakistan. It thought that it will overrun East Pakistan in a matter of days. And however outnumbered our forces were, we had only one Air Force squadron, we had hardly one division of army over there, and a very limited number of, paramilitary forces. The odds were tilted against us because the Mukti Bahini, the Indian raw agents who were infiltrating in the garb of the Mukti Bahini and who knew the terrain so well, they had tried to put the Pakistani armed forces on their knees. But it goes to the credit of our brave armed forces that they resisted and they let the war continue till the 16th of December. But meanwhile, you see the front on the West Pakistan opened, and it was no longer a limited war against Kashmir. The war was carried out on all fronts, and ultimately, when India did achieve its goal of capturing East Pakistan after having invaded it, forced the instrument of surrender, it called for a ceasefire in West Pakistan also.
Mr. Hali, are the events of 1971 a perfect example of India meddling in Pakistan, considering how a militia was raised and how linguistic fault lines were exploited?
Indeed, you see, as I said earlier, India was, plotting, planning, machinating, and intriguing. And it carried out a complete operation by virtue of which it wanted, you must go back into the pre-1947 psyche of the Indians. They never wanted the, independence of Pakistan. They did not want the division of what they call Mother India. People like Savarkar and so on, even Gandhi, they were averse to the fact that India should be divided. And the Brahmins, they considered it Mother India and its division as a desecration of their motherland. But they had been plotting and planning, and it was envisaged that within a year or two, Pakistan will be so subjugated and so subdued by India that it will itself, put down its knees and beg the Indian government to be retaken into the fold of a united India. Alhamdulillah, that did not happen. So the next thing was East Pakistan, which was divided by a territory of which is hostile because it was India which was in between East Pakistan and West Pakistan. 1,000 miles, which in kilometers is 1,400 kilometers. And India made sure that the Pakistanis or the Pakistani armed forces are stranded over there. Now, the operation which started did not start militarily. It was what in these days we use the term hybrid warfare. It was started 50 years ago by the Indians, by the followers of Chanakya. They had exploited the fault line. Now, please remember one thing, that the Muslim League was formed in the streets of Dhaka. It was the Bengali leaders who were actually the stalwarts and the front runners of the Pakistan movement. Nawab Sir Salimullah and Fazl Haq, who presented the Lahore Resolution on 23rd March 1940, which came to be known as the Pakistan Resolution. And so many other leaders like Hussain Shaheed Suharwardi, and these were all Bengalis. So the question arises, how could a group of people who had actually envisaged and fought and sacrificed for the freedom of Pakistan be led away? But that is exactly what India did. Through its machinations, it created fault lines, it exploited. Of course, there are, even in a single family, there are problems sometimes in siblings, there are rivalries, there are jealousies, but they are resolved through peaceful means. And we could have perhaps done that. Hindsight says that perhaps we, the people who were from West Pakistan, were also at fault. But it was actually exploited to such an extent that a nation which was bona fide Pakistani, which was, a lover of Pakistan, was turned and forced to seek freedom. And now I visit Bangladesh and I meet some of my old friends, especially those who were in the Pakistan Air Force and others, and some of the friends of my father who was a professor in Dhaka University who is still alive. Believe me, they say that we never wanted a separation. It was forced upon us, and I don't know why we committed this folly. These are the words of these people. So obviously, India machinated in every way possible and achieved its heinous agenda because we were caught surrounded by the enemy, and as well as its propaganda and its hybrid warfare and every type of treachery and trickery which the followers of Chanakya could think up and drum into.
Is it accurate to say that a majority of Pakistani Bengalis in 1969 and in 1970 and 71, a majority of Pakistani Bengalis were agitating politically for usual and normal political demands and rights and not for separation and war?
Exactly. You see, if you draw parallels, in the modern era we have the 18th Amendment. The provinces are agitating for their rights, and it was something akin to that. Yes, Mujib's 6-point formula, which was perhaps rejected by some of the politicians in West Pakistan, which was never considered by the then Chief Martial Law Administrator and the President of Pakistan, Yahya Khan. Sheikh Mujib considered it a bargaining chip, and he was never serious about all the 6 points. He thought that he will be able to get some concessions, and also in their mind, they were being, you see, it was being drummed into their mind that the resources of East Pakistan were being utilized in West Pakistan. Once upon a time, Sheikh Mujib had come to Islamabad and said that I can smell jute from the beautiful roads of Islamabad. Now, these were things which were created as myths and implanted either through subliminal programming or through a propaganda effort, and the Bengalis were turned away from the heartland of Pakistan, and that is how India achieved its heinous agenda.
Should we, or basically, let me put it this way, this question, and this is a difficult question for us Pakistanis. In your view, briefly, what are the key mistakes that we can learn from in hindsight that actually helped India achieve its agenda in East Pakistan? What are our key mistakes?
Well, first of all, I'll call it, with due apology to my friends in the special branches or in the what you call intelligence setup, it was an intelligence failure. Although it was an ISI officer, a young lieutenant colonel, who first detected the Agartala conspiracy, and when he detected it, his life was attempted upon. He managed to save himself, fought bravely. But otherwise, we should have foreseen what India is planning, and we should have taken action, and we should have taken retaliatory action. Number two, you see, I mentioned that 1,000 miles or 1,400 kilometers of hostile territory was in between India and Pakistan, and India went to the extent of even orchestrating the hijack of its own derelict Fokker aircraft, which was named Ganga and made to fly to Lahore. It was set on fire, and this was used as a pretext to stop the logistic flow of army and equipment from West to East Pakistan. You see, in 1952, K.M. Panika, who happens to be an Indian naval strategist, in his book India and the Indian Ocean, he had mentioned, and mind you, the enemy is saying this, that Pakistan is going to have two navies, one for the protection of East Pakistan and one for the protection of West Pakistan. But the rulers here, they ignored what the enemy was professing. I wish we had followed it. In fact, I'm sorry to say that Field Marshal Ayub Khan, who was the president of Pakistan, was a landlubber. There was a stage when he even wanted to disband Pakistan Navy. He thought we don't need a navy. So if we had had two navies, we would have never been blockaded, and we would have made sure that the India doesn't achieve its heinous agenda. Thirdly, the Indian media went berserk. The Indian media was in top gear to denigrate Pakistan. It was painting Pakistan as killers, as people who carried out genocide, and the people who had marauded and raped Bengali women. Now, the fact remains that we were at the receiving end and we did very little to counter this propaganda. So much so that our younger generation should know that the famous international musical band of the Beatles, they carried out a concert for Bangladesh. I still remember one of the songs which haunts me, all the people dying there, all the people crying there. And these created a major impact in the world. And the world was looking upon Pakistan as an aggressor. And we here in Pakistan did little or did nothing to counter this propaganda. When the 25th March action took place, very few people were informed that why did the army, why was its hand forced? Because the Bengalis, the Mukti Bahini, and more importantly, the raw agents who knew that the Mukti Bahini is still not trained enough, but they put on their garb and in their disguise, they came and murdered, butchered and raped the Bihari men and women, the non-Bengalis, and even the West Pakistani soldiers who were posted to East Pakistan. If the army's hand was forced in Operation Searchlight on 25th March, it was to save Pakistan. And we had lost East Pakistan. It was fought back inch by inch in a territory which was hostile, which was rife with Indian agents who were saboteurs, who were propagandists, and who were trying to make sure that the Pakistan army fails. But you see, we should have put out a narrative. At that stage, we made the mistake that we barred the international media from being in East Pakistan. So India had a field day. It could tell its story unchallenged. People like McHenus, whose article Genocide, and by the way, McHenus was a Pakistani, he was there, but his article was published in The Guardian and it created a havoc. So these are the problems. Then the rulers in West Pakistan should have heard the cries of anguish from the Bengali people when they were talking about their rights. We should not have labeled each one of them as traitors. We should have sat down with them and asked them what was their problem. Now you see, there are three personalities who need to be named. One was Lieutenant General Sahibzada Yaqub Khan, who was the general officer commanding of the armed forces, or rather the Pakistan Army in East Pakistan. The second was Admiral S.M. Hassan, who was the governor. And the third was Air Commodore Mitti Masood. Actually, his name is Zafar Masood, but euphemistically he was called Mitti Masood. These three gentlemen, they carried out a study, and mind you, all these three were very brave people. Sahibzada Yaqub Khan had fought the Second World War. He was a war hero. He had been taken prisoner, but he really gave a good account of himself. Admiral Hassan was the ADC to Lord Mountbatten, and later the ADC to Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Ji, the founder of Pakistan. He had served as naval attaché in the UK, and he was an outstanding officer. And Mitti Masood, by the way, as a group captain, was the base commander of Sargodha in 1965, and he gave such a good account of himself. I don't need to go into history, but he was awarded the Halal-e-Jurrat. And all these three people, because they were on the ground, they recommended to the government, they begged them that please don't take the extreme action of a military action. Instead, let's sit down and talk. But they were hawks, and there were people who were prevalent. They ignored these kind words and words of wisdom, the pearls of wisdom which were cast, and we took the military action. As I said, our hands were forced, but that came later. We could have, presaged it. And of course, a very important point is that the 1970 elections saw Sheikh Mujibur Rahman emerge as the victor. If he was victorious, why wasn't he invited to form the government of a united Pakistan? People said he's a traitor. You see, I mean, you can debate it both ways. You can debate it till the crows come home to roost. But the fact remains that the first four prime ministers, apart from Liaquat Ali Khan, prime ministers of Pakistan were Bengalis. And they were bona fide citizens who gave a good account for themselves. So how could we assume that if Sheikh Mujibur Rahman is not given the ultimate position of becoming the prime minister, he would turn traitor and sell East Pakistan, because now he would be the Prime Minister of the whole of Pakistan. So these are factors which I think were ignored, and that is why the debacle became a debacle.
Mr. Hali, tell us something about how the Indian trained militia, Mukti, how this Indian trained militia was trained both inside India and trained also inside the Soviet Union.
It's a point to ponder. As I said, that India had been plotting and planning the invasion of East Pakistan. Indira Gandhi had created the Research and Analysis Wing, RAW, and the first task granted to it in 1968, by the way, was the severance of East Pakistan. And RAW had been given this task, and it went about it in a very, from their point of view, a dedicated manner. They made sure that the Bengalis are subverted, their minds are poisoned, and so on. But here also was a major player, erstwhile Soviet Union. And I am not saying this based upon my own, conjecture, but Yuri Brezhnev, who was a KGB agent, who was posted in India in the late 60s as well as early 70s. He defected to the USA, to the CIA, and he has given a detailed interview which is available on the YouTube, in which he talks about how the Soviet Union aided India in carrying out subversion in East Pakistan. He talks about not only providing equipment, arms, but also literature, and taking Bengali youth to the Soviet Union and turning them not only into mercenaries, but into cold-blooded murderers. The story is so heinous that it makes me tremble, but he has admitted this to the world, that the Soviet Union and the Indian RAW, they colluded to carry out this task, this gruesome task, in erstwhile East Pakistan, now Bangladesh.
Last question. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, has officially, in a public ceremony, admitted and owned to the Indian role in the events of 1971 inside a neighboring country, across international borders. Is this confession by the Indian Prime Minister can be, in hindsight, used as an admission of guilt in a criminal, supposed, hypothetical criminal trial?
Indeed, it can be. But then it proves the point that throughout it was India and it was the Indians, of course aided by the Soviet Union, and some other enemies, detractors of Pakistan, carried out this heinous, plot. But the very fact that the Indian Prime Minister comes on the floor of the Bangladeshi parliament, by the way, and boasts, beats his chest and claims that India was responsible, and he also personally takes responsibility that he himself had participated as a member of the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, the RSS, which is the dreaded militant organization of India. Now, this admission should actually be used in an international court of justice to bring a lawsuit against India. But the fact remains that after 50 years, we are trying to bring a closure. We are trying to bring Bangladesh and Pakistan officially closer. Because, let's not fool ourselves. There's no Berlin Wall which will fall. But you see, our relationship can be better, because please remember that the statement which was made by Indira Gandhi after East Pakistan had fallen was that today we have sunk Jinnah's two-nation theory in the Bay of Bengal. And there was a lot of clapping and backslapping. But 50 years on, we see that actually the Qaid was vindicated. Yes, Bangladesh became a reality. Bangladesh is a sovereign nation, and Bangladesh has done very well. In fact, in many aspects, it has done better than Pakistan. But the fact remains that the state religion of Bangladesh is Islam. It may not be the Islamic Republic of Bangladesh, but a state religion is Islam, and of course it gives, you see, preference or rather admits that there are other religions who must be respected. But the fact that there are two Muslim states who are powerful enough and in the region is a vindication of Jinnah's two-nation theory. But as far as Mr. Modi's boasts, we must at least expose him for the kind of, you see, heinous acts that India carried out in the severance of Pakistan, and he is also responsible for the millions of innocent Pakistanis who were killed and butchered, and also Bangladeshis. My heart goes out to every human life that was lost in 1971. Every life is precious, but it is time that we try and heal the wounds, because please remember, the divine providence has taken place. All the progenitors and the major players like Indira Gandhi, like Yahya Khan, like Niazi, like Sheikh Mujib, Tajuddin, General Shafic Singh, and so on, have met their maker, including later our President and Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and divine retribution has taken place.
Thank you, Ali sir.